Hi everyone, my name's Connor. Welcome to Locomotive History. Today we're going to talk about another section of line that became known as the Midwest and Southern. We're going to talk about three railway companies today. The first is the McLeod Short Line that operated from 1857 to 1904. And the second is the Pinewood Timber Railroad, which was the rail line that hauled timber for the Pinewood Timber Company. And the third will be the Southern and Panhandle. The first railway company, the McLeod Short Line, was opened in 1857 by the McLeod family in Kansas when a large amount of gypsum was discovered. The railway, which became known as the Heart of Kansas, operated with a fleet at first of 7 Baldwin 440 steam locomotives. Number 1 eventually became the personal locomotive for the McLeod family. The railroad expanded and by 1860 had almost 70 miles of track running between several locations. The railroad continued to expand outwards and eventually became known for it being able to haul some of the longest loads in the area. When the Foley and Southern Railroad was sold to the new Midwest and Southern, the company agreed to let the McLeod Short Line remain independent and to not interfere with its operations. The railroad expanded and eventually, in 1874, expanded out to become one of the largest railroads in Kansas with an estimated 900 miles of track. It was during this time that the next set of locomotives were built, 34 of which, in 1874, of the famous Pearson City 282 class heavy freight locomotives. These locomotives, which turned out to be very beneficial for the railroad, hauled some of the longer and heavier gypsum trains. The railroad continued, and in 1901 they built the final locomotive fleet, which was a set of two 210 custom-built locomotives. All of these engines were built from the Pearson City Locomotive Works. Unfortunately, tragedy did strike the company when, in 1897, due to unforeseen circumstances, a large number of the McLeod family were killed. It was found that the private train ran past a danger signal, which unfortunately failed to show proper danger. It was at this time that the McLeod family was hauling the train was not in fact number 1 of the Baldwins, but one of the 34 Pearson City class locomotives. It was until 1904 the railroad struggled, with so few of the family able to keep it going. It was at that time the McLeod family decided to sell the company to the growing Midwest and Southern Railroad, and thus ended a dynasty. Back over in Oklahoma, or specifically the Dakota-Oklahoma region, another company came forward, the Pinewood Timber Company, which needed a new section of line to access its timberland in the Annville Valley. And thus the Pinewood Timber Railroad was born. The railway first started being short at only around 30 miles in length, and thus not very efficient. But this allowed the railroad to log a vast volume of timber. The following years caused the railroad to expand as timberland became more and more barren, and thus one of the longest known trestles in the world, which was almost 8 miles over a peat marsh, became built and was known as the Pine Timber Trestle. The company first started out with 4 Mason locomotives, specifically of the articulated design. All these engines worked until the late 1800s, in which they were retired. In 1890, 3 more locomotives of the Climax type logging engines were built. These were geared engines and proved to be very beneficial for the railroad. The following years, more locomotives were added, specifically Heisler types, and all of which were built and designed to haul heavy loads. The railroad by 1902 was struggling due to a lack of timber, as at that point it had been 41 years since the railway's opening. The company continued, but by 1918, after the war, things had gone from bad to worse. Timberland was becoming more and more barren. Though the company still had plenty of timber coming in, it was coming in from other areas. And by 1921, the railroad shut its doors. However, as luck would have it, in 1979, a former British Columbian logger, Mr. Malcolm O'Reilly, came forward. He found the railroad and bought it for a bargain from the company, costing him less than $1,000. Over the next several years, he found several locomotives, including some of the Masons, the Climaxes, and the Heislers, in a series of sheds all along the line. And by 1975, a scenic railway had opened that became known as the Pinewood Scenic Railroad, running on all 90 miles of track. The railroad continued for several years and is still open today, but its biggest find was in 2023, when at the end of the line, which they had finally managed to reach, an experimental, unique engine built by the Pearson City Locomotive Works was found. This being a Shay, but what made it different and unique was the fact that it had a 4-cylinder engine compared to the standard 3, and 3-axle trucks compared to the standard 2, and weighed quite a number more in tons. It was named Ephraim Shay, after the inventor. The final railroad was the Southern and Panhandle, a unique route that operated exclusively in the west end of Oklahoma and in the area of Colorado. The Southern and Panhandle mainly operated high-volume trains, specifically helping out the then new Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. The company was very small, and unfortunately for it, its owner was a big fan of British rail stock. The company was founded in 1899. They bought several rail locomotives, many of which were former locomotives of the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway and the London and South Western Railroad, as well as engines from the Midland and several Scottish railroads. This resulted in a huge strain on the company's finances, as it would have to order all parts and everything for the railroad. This continued for several years until eventually, by 1920, the company had to declare bankruptcy and sold the then struggling and small railroad with less than 200 miles of track to the booming Midwest and Southern, and thus bringing an end to a large portion of land.